Thank you for coming along this evening. My name's Renee Trainer. I'm the Team Leader of Diversity and Inclusion at Canary Bankstown Council, and I'm joined here this evening with my colleague Barbara Grant. She's our First Nations Community Development Officer. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on this evening, the Darug people, and pay my respect to elders gone before us, those that are currently leading within our community, and those that will continue to follow in many generations to come. In particular, I'd like to pay my respects to the Bedigal people who live along the Georges River, where I myself grew up and began to raise my own family before I moved down south, and I'm now living on Dharawal country. This map here represents a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations across New South Wales. So as you can see here, there's quite a lot of nations within New South Wales. When we're looking at Australia, there are over 500 different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations across the land that we now call Australia. Each nation, they have their own languages and their own cultures and different dialects within their languages as well. So we do live in a very diverse country in this land today. So in terms of today's purpose, thank you for coming along to find out a little bit more about the upcoming referendum. So we're going to talk about what has led to this referendum, the referendum that we're having this year. We're going to talk a little bit about the Uluru Statement from the Heart and a bit of history. We're going to then look at what is a constitution and a referendum, what is the voice to Parliament, what this means for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, some resources to help you make an informed decision on referendum day, and then we'll also go through how and when you can vote. So referendum day being on the 14th of October. So in terms of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, I'd like to focus a bit of attention to that tonight because that is kind of what's led to the referendum this year. Has anyone heard of the Uluru Statement from the Heart before? Yep. Some may or may not have, or maybe you've heard the term used more recently but don't really know much about it. So I'm going to do my best to kind of explain that to you all as well. So I've provided a copy of the Uluru Statement from the Heart that you can take home and read with you and kind of dissect it yourself to understand it. But basically the statement represents the diverse First Nations views from across Australia. It was developed through a series of conferences, or what they called regional dialogues, involving more than 1,200 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from across the country. While not every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nation was involved, because we talked about how there's over 500 nations across Australia, so not every nation was involved in these regional dialogues. However, those 1,200 people came from 13 different regions across each state in Australia, as well as the Torres Strait. The final statement was then presented to the Australian people by 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at the First Nations National Constitutional Convention in Uluru in 2017. So the statement itself, it's an invitation from a group of First Nations people to non-Indigenous Australians and calls for reforms to help realise Indigenous rights through the establishment of an Indigenous voice to Parliament and a Makarrata Commission. Makarrata is a multi-layered Yolngu word, and Yolngu is a nation in the Northern Territory. So it's a Yolngu word understood as the coming together after a struggle. So the statement specifies that the Makarrata Commission would undertake processes of agreement making or a treaty and truth-telling. So when we look at this Uluru Statement, it's an invitation to come together and walk together like a process of healing and agreement making, that coming together after the struggle of the history within our country. So when hearing about the Uluru Statement from the Heart, you may or may not have heard of the kind of phrase voice, treaty, truth, perhaps. So in summary, through the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Indigenous Australians are asked that they have a say in matters that affect them. That's known as the voice portion. That the nation acknowledges its past actions, known as truth-telling, or the truth, and that we establish a sound basis to walk together into the future, known as the treaty. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is said to be a gift from First Nations people of Australia to non-Indigenous Australians as an invitation to walk together. So as I mentioned, there's the three key pillars for the reform within the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And this was come together after decades of research, reports and calls for genuine and fundamental reforms to recognise and protect the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of the lands and the waters. The statement was led by First Nations people, not a particular political party, and it was presented to the Australian people in 2017. So while there hasn't been a lot of talk about it, and you may not have heard it until recent times, there has been some movement in education on the statement. However, there's been a lot of the progress taking place since the current Prime Minister announced on his, in his victory speech on election night last year that he was committed to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. And within that, his way of committing to that was to hold a referendum on the voice. So when we look at those three parts of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the voice is the key one that requires constitutional change, which requires a referendum. So the first step for him to be committing to the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full is to his announcement of holding a referendum to embed the voice to Parliament. So this is kind of the part of the Uluru Statement from the Heart that we're working towards at the moment with the referendum. That's what we're going to focus on tonight. So we're now going to watch some snippets of a TED Talk by a First Nations man named Dean Parkin. He's a First Nations activist and he's from the Quandamooka people of Minjerribah. And Dean was a facilitator for those regional dialogues that I talked about that happened across the country, and also a facilitator at the Uluru Constitutional Convention in Uluru in 2017. It's important to note that this video that we're going to watch, it's from 2018, so there has been a lot of changes taken place since then, but it's also filmed prior to any political party committing to supporting the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So the whole video goes through about 19 minutes. I'd encourage you to watch it again at home if you've got the time, because we won't be watching all of it. But I do think it's quite, symbolic in that regard.
I want to make a really important point. If you remember nothing else from this talk, remember this. There's a reason why this statement is with me on this stage today, and not hanging in the Parliament or the Prime Minister's office. It is not a submission or a petition to the government. It is an invitation to you, the Australian people. The statement commences. We, gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This, our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture, from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That peoples possessed the land for 60 millennia and this ancient link disappears from history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. A unanimous theme across the dialogues across Australia from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples is that First Nations sovereignty has never been ceded. At the Ross River Dialogue, about 100 kilometres east of Alice Springs, with 3 interpreters in the room to take into account the different language groups, people talked about their jukapa, their unshakable connection to their past, present, and future. It is their law, and it's their way of life. They did not talk about sovereignty as some sort of abstract political concept. In fact, the word itself was barely mentioned, not because it is unimportant, but because it is so fundamental to who they are, it is impossible to imagine living a life without it. It has never been and will never be ceded. However, the statement doesn't stop at this notion of just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sovereignty alone. It does not regard it in isolation, but in coexistence with the sovereignty of the Crown. The fundamental reckoning of these two sovereignties is the settlement that has evaded us as a nation since 1788. In welcoming people to this year's Garma Festival in Northeast Arnhem Land, my brother and Gumat Elder Jawa Yunupingu summed up this sentiment beautifully when he said, "You will hear us singing tonight, and we will be singing to our ancestors, who are your ancestors too. We will be singing to them to remind them we are here, maintaining our connection to them for their appreciation. And we do this not just for us, but for all of us, because our sovereignty is not a hard and brutal sovereignty. It does not take from others. It does not exclude or steal. Our sovereignty is welcoming." The triumph of this statement is not the proposals it contains or the consensus that it represents. It is that these words come from a place of deep love for each other as Australians and belief that we will seize this opportunity to reimagine ourselves and remake ourselves as a nation. This is the profound gift that the Uluru Statement from the Heart gives to all of us. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alienated from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness.
I just wanted to quickly summarise that before Barb joins us. But in terms of that discussion there around that sovereignty, I think a really key point there was around how Dean mentioned the sovereignty and the spiritual sovereignty, the connection with the land, and how Aboriginal land was never ceded at colonisation. It was never handed over. So talking about that walking together and moving forward, he talks about how the spiritual sovereignty can coexist with the sovereignty of the Crown or the Commonwealth. So in moving forward, they're asking that there is that coexistence because it can never be taken away from them. It's so deep, that connection and their connection with the spirit and the land. So when he talks about that sovereignty and the land never being ceded, but also moving forward, working how they can, the sovereignties can coexist with the Crown.
Yep, so following on with Dean's speech as well. So due to the treatment of First Nations people since colonisation, including the stolen generation, where Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families, the impacts are still felt today. This is known as intergenerational trauma. So in 2008, the Australian government made a formal commitment to address First Nations disadvantage in Australia, known as Closing the Gap. The gap refers to the vast health and life expectation inequality between First Nations people and non-Indigenous people in Australia. Some of what Dean was talking about are the statistics that are currently listed in the Closing the Gap report, were due to intergenerational trauma they experienced. So as you can see, the 2 times higher the rates of suicide, 11 times higher the rates of incarceration, 10 times for the rates of inadequate housing and crowded living conditions, 2 times higher rates of unemployment, 8.5 years lower life expectancy, 7 times more children in care, higher death rate among children and youth due to unintentional injuries, poorer health, lower levels of education, lower income levels as well. So we'll go back to a video from Dean. We're going to listen to a little bit more about the Uluru Statement.
Constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations body enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It represents our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. The Voice to Parliament proposal is the only one that requires a constitutional change and will need a vote of you, the Australian people, in a referendum to succeed. There are no silver bullets for the challenges facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but we have consistently advocated for political representation and genuine self-determination for many decades. We know that the solutions to these challenges will be more effective and more productive when we have a closer say over them. The Voice will not diminish the authority of the Parliament, but will enhance its effectiveness. It is fair to say it needs some help. In the 10 years of the Closing the Gap strategy, we have seen 6 Prime Ministers and 27 Premiers and Chief Ministers come and go. It is hard to take a generational view on issues like children and out-of-home care with that sort of disruption. We need the continuity and certainty of a constitutionally enshrined First Nations Voice to Parliament to ensure that critical decisions are informed by First Nations who are closest to the challenges. The constitutional protection is really, really important. We have seen many representative bodies rise and fall in the past. They were all vulnerable to changes in the political climate, but the problems still remain. Just putting this through a normal legislation process, a Voice to Parliament through a normal legislation process, is repeating the mistakes of the past, and I'll be back here in 20 years dusting off the same talk. The Voice to Parliament will scrutinise policy and legislation and will improve the ability of the Parliament to make good laws about us. It will be a strong representative voice that will benefit not just to the Parliament, but to the business and social sectors in ongoing reform. It is a pragmatic and productive proposal. The other structural reform proposed is a Makarrata Commission to lead to agreement making and truth-telling. This does not require a change to the Constitution like the Voice to Parliament. The Makarrata Commission will guide the process of settling the relationship between the sovereignty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander First Nations and that of the Crown. It will establish a national treaty framework that will guide the process of negotiations across the country to give some consistency. The Makarrata Commission will also establish a truth-telling process about our nation's history. While we honour our involvement in foreign wars, we turn a blind eye to the frontier wars and the violence that heralded the British colonisation of this country. Some of these conflicts are not that old and our people remember them. Delegates at the Cairns Dialogue remember the midnight raid by Queensland Police at Mapoon in 1963, the forced removal of its residents and the burning of their homes to the ground. Truth-telling is not about apportioning blame or generating guilt, but it is the clear realisation that deep reconciliation in this country is impossible without also knowing and naming the truth of our shared history. The statement concludes. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. This is our moment to make our own history. One that acknowledges the past properly and imagines a greater future. A future that connects us to each other through truth, love, and belief, and binds us as a nation to this land and its ancient story. The invitation is here. This is our moment to decide what our legacy is going to be. Tell this story to others. Start a conversation about the promise of our shared identity. Express your support at ullaruforall.com. Write to your MP.
But there, because he then goes on to talk about how you can advocate and work towards achieving this Uluru Statement from the Heart, which is kind of where we're at today. We're that step closer, working towards the referendum. So in terms of a constitution, the Australian Constitution is a set of rules by which Australia operates by. It's been in place since the 1st of January 1901, and the only way to change the Constitution is by holding a referendum. It's up to the people of Australia to decide if the Constitution should change. So since 1901, there's been 44 proposals to change the Constitution. So there's been 44 referendums, and only 8 of which have been approved.
We've heard a lot of talk about a potential federal referendum. Well, there hasn't been one in a while. It's been since 1999, and there are some eligible voters who weren't even born then. So what is a referendum? It's a national vote on a particular issue to potentially change the Constitution. Federal Parliament, they come up with a question. Then it's over to voters to say yes or no. It is a compulsory vote. It's exactly the same as a federal election in that you must turn out and have your say. How does it pass? Well, you need a double majority. Not only does the majority of people nationally have to say yes on the issue, it also requires at least 4 of the 6 states to say yes as well. We haven't had one in a while, so if you have questions, go to the AEC website or ask us a question in the comments below.
Authorised by the Electoral Commissioner, Canberra.
So that video is obviously produced by the Australian Electoral Commission, and they've got a whole lot of information and resources on their website available to explain a little bit more about referendums as well. So if we look at referendums in general, so in May 1967, there was 10 years of campaigning, and then a referendum was held for Aboriginal recognition in the Australian Constitution. So in the lead up to that poll, the focus was around the public attention on the fact that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were treated as second-class citizens. At that referendum in 1967, nearly 91% of the electorate voted to amend the Constitution. So this change meant that Aboriginal people would be counted as part of the population and acknowledged as equal citizens in Australia, and that the Commonwealth would then be able to make laws on their behalf. This was seen to reflect public recognition of Aboriginal people as full Australian citizens. This upcoming referendum that we've got is the second referendum dedicated to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people out of those 44 referendums that have been held since 1901. So this year's referendum will ask Australians to vote on whether to establish an Indigenous voice to Parliament, which is a representative body that will advise Parliament on matters that affect Indigenous Australians. So on referendum day, you'll be asked one single question, and you'll need to respond with the answer either yes or no. So that question is, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? So that's the question that will be on the ballot paper. That's the question that you'll be answering to in the vote. If we have a double majority of the answer yes, then there will be a new chapter added into the Australian Constitution. So that new chapter that will be added, the constitutional amendment, will be Chapter 9, Recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples, 129, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the First Peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures.
Yeah, and so following on, the voice would be an independent and permanent advisory body. What this means is that regardless of which political party is in government, this advisory body would still be still be in a position to provide advice to Parliament. In the past, bodies were established such as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, ATSIC. However, this was abolished by the political party in government at that time. By having the voice enshrined into the Constitution, the voice will not be able to be abolished unless there was another referendum. So the voice is aimed to give advice to Australian Parliament and government on matters that affect the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including education, health, housing, justice and other policies with practical impact on First Nations people. If the referendum passes, there would be a process with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, the Parliament and the broader public to settle the voice design. While the design of the voice has been proposed, nothing will be finalised until the federal government confirm the changes to the Constitution that are wanted by the Australian people. Legislation to establish the voice would then go through standard parliamentary processes to ensure adequate scrutiny by elected representatives in both houses of Parliament. This would ensure the voice can evolve and adapt it as circumstances change while upholding the authority of Parliament to legislate the voice. The voice will be consulted early in policy and lawmaking that affects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The voice will road test ideas and make suggestions on how they can be improved. The voice will not have the power to stop laws or policies from going ahead, and its advice can be accepted or ignored by the Parliament. The existence of a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people does not negate anyone else's ability to have their voices heard also.
So in terms of the referendum itself, so it's going to be held on Saturday the 14th of October, so we've got a couple of weeks to go now. The Australian Electoral Commission have a great website that provides a whole lot of information in terms of the polling locations, where you can go, where's your local polling booth on referendum day. The official referendum booklet, which you should have received, every household should have received that information, and that official referendum booklet talks about the yes and the no cases if you're still trying to make up your mind and understand a bit more about it. So you can find that on the Australian Electoral Commission's website. And they also have a wide range of translated information as well. So just a little bit of additional information, and for your information, so at Council's meeting on the 29th of August, the Mayor put forward a mayoral minute to state the Council will continue leading the way by taking the next step and committing our Council to supporting the yes case. So while we are here today to ensure that you become educated and able to make an informed decision, I'm just sharing that Council has made that decision to be supporting the Uluru Statement from the Heart, with our Mayor signing a Mayor's commitment to supporting the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And that leads us nicely into, it's a short clip featuring John Farnham's song, iconic song, You're the Voice. It's a 2-minute film which features an Australian family through the years watching key turning points in our nation's history. These include the successful 1967 referendum that allowed the government to make laws for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and counted them in the census. So before that, they were not counted within our population counts. It features Cathy Freeman's 400-metre win at the 2000 Olympics. I remember watching it on my TV at home. It was pretty exciting. I was only 10 years old. Former Prime Minister John Howard's 1996 gun reforms, Kevin Rudd's 2008 apology to the stolen generation, and the 2016 same-sex marriage plebiscite. So some really key moments in history, and I think it's a nice way for us to sum up the session this evening.
Aborigines a fair go in the face of racial inequality. We have turn the pages over. Right when we wanna ride, we gotta wait before we get much older.
We are right to instill national pride in our children, but please let's make our national pride encompass humanity.
Eddie Marvo and 5 other Pacific Islanders.
We're all someone's daughter. We're all someone's son. How long and look at each other. Down the barrel of a gun. Got a voice trying to understand it. Make the noise and make it clear. We're not gonna sit in silence. We're not gonna live with fear. This time,
I'm sorry.
we know we all can stand together. Power to be powerful. Believe that we can make it better.
Australian people have spoken, and they have voted overwhelmingly yes.
Ooh, we're all someone's daughter. We're all someone's son. Hello, and we look at each other.
In 2017, we seek to be heard.
Down the barrel of a gun. None of us trying to understand it. Make a noise and make it clear. We're not gonna sit in silence. We're not gonna live with fear. None of us trying to understand it. Make a noise and make it clear.
So that brings us to the end of our session this evening. I hope that you feel that you've gained a little bit more information in relation to what's led to the referendum that's happening this year, in terms of that Uluru Statement from the Heart and the 3 key parts that come out of it. The referendum being step 1 of this Uluru Statement from the Heart, but also step 1 of the voice. So it's a matter of finding out, do the Australian people want to have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice enshrined into the Constitution? And I think that that's a really key point there, is that once it's enshrined into the Constitution, it can't be taken out. So it doesn't matter which political party might be in power at the time, it can't be abolished. That voice to Parliament will always be there, unlike what has happened in the past with various commissions that have been set up to provide that advice. So it's an advisory board. It'll be enshrined into the Australian Constitution. The only way to remove that voice to Parliament would be to have another referendum, gain the double majority vote to then be able to remove it. So I think that's the important part, is having it enshrined into the Constitution. Does anyone have any questions in relation to the content we've presented tonight? No?
Not so much a question, just a comment to say that it was really well explained.
Oh, thank you.
Not like the schmozzle that's out there in the media at the moment.
Yeah, it's the best one out there.
Yes.
I went to a few, but this is the best one.
Oh, thank you.
And this you explain why we did the boys, the Makarata, and what's the last one?
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Anything that we can help with to help you on referendum day? Assist with polling locations or anything like that?
Just if the council says yes to the voice, what are they doing to promote their opinion?
And that was the Mayor's commitment. So he made that statement in a mayoral minute at the council meeting. And he publicly put that in his mayoral messaging the following week to the community. But other than that, we've already committed to making these information sessions to be fairly neutral so that we can ensure that our community can make an informed decision. There are a lot of different, mixed messages out there, so we want to ensure that we provided some civic education around just making an informed decision. But in terms of working towards Uluru Statement from the Heart and our journey towards reconciliation, we have Barbara as our First Nations Community Development Officer, who runs a number of programs within the community for First Nations people and to educate within the community about our First Nations culture as well. So we'll be continuing to do that regardless of the outcome of the referendum as well. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? No? Well, thank you so much for coming along today and taking the time out. I know there's a lot of confusion out there, so I do appreciate you taking the time out to come and learn a little bit more about it before referendum day.